The December wind cut through the city streets like a predator's warning, carrying snow that had turned from picturesque to lethal in the span of an hour. Blake Austin pulled his black fur-lined overcoat tighter as he walked through Henderson Park. His alpha instincts still coiled tight from the merger negotiation that had run 3 hours over schedule. At 38, he'd built Austin Industries from nothing into a billion-dollar empire that made other alphas bow their heads in boardrooms. But dominance had come with a price. His perfectly ordered life was full of power and devoid of pack. His penthouse apartment was immaculate and empty. Every surface gleamed with sterile perfection. No scent but his own. No heartbeat but his own. He'd convinced himself this was strength, needing no one, protecting nothing but profit margins. He was taking the shortcut through Henderson Park because his driver had called in sick, and Blake had decided to walk the 12 blocks home rather than wait for a replacement. The Christmas lights strung through the bare trees should have been cheerful, but they only emphasized the hollowness in his chest, how the holiday season had become just another stretch of time to endure, another year without purpose beyond the next quarterly report. That's when he heard the voice. "Sir." Blake turned to find a young Omega boy standing near a snow-covered bench, maybe 7 or 8 years old. He wore a thin jacket the color of sand that was laughably inadequate for the weather, a faded red sweater underneath, and jeans that were worn through at the knees. His brown hair was damp with melting snow, his cheeks raw from the cold, and Blake could see him shivering even from 6 feet away. But it was his eyes that triggered something deep in Blake's alpha hindbrain. Wide, terrified, fighting so hard to stay strong even as his small body trembled. "Yes." Blake approached carefully, his senses sharpening, searching for a parent, another adult, anyone. "What do you need?" "Sir, my baby pup is freezing." The boy's voice cracked on the last word. "I don't know what to do anymore." That's when Blake noticed the bundle the child was clutching against his chest. An infant wrapped in what looked like a single cotton blanket. No hat, no proper covering. The baby, a girl he thought, based on the soft whimpers, had a face flushed scarlet from cold, her tiny fists jerking weakly. Her cries were growing softer, thinner, and Blake knew with brutal alpha certainty that this was a crisis. "Where's your dam?" Blake asked, already moving closer, his coat halfway off his shoulders. "Where's your mother?" "Mama left us here," the boy whispered, and his brave Omega mask finally shattered. "She said she'd be right back, but that was hours ago, before it got dark. I tried to keep Nora warm, but she won't stop crying. Except now she's getting too quiet. And Mama always said that when babies go quiet in the cold, that's when." His voice broke completely. Blake didn't let him finish. The alpha in him roared to life, primal, absolute, and completely beyond his control. Blake moved on instinct, every alpha nerve in his body screaming that these pups were in danger, and he was the only thing standing between them and death. He wrapped his fur-lined overcoat around Nathan's thin shoulders, then carefully gathered the baby from the boy's trembling arms. Nora was terrifyingly light, her tiny body radiating a cold that felt wrong against his hands. "You're safe now," Blake said, and the words came out rougher than he intended, edged with a command that made Nathan's eyes go wide. "Both of you. I've got you." Nathan nodded mutely, his small hands clutching the edges of Blake's coat like a lifeline. The Omega child's scent was sharp with fear and exhaustion, and something in Blake's chest twisted hard. He'd spent 15 years teaching himself not to feel this, not to care, not to connect, not to need. But standing in the snow with 2 abandoned pups, all that carefully constructed distance evaporated like it had never existed at all. "What's your name?" Blake asked as he adjusted Nora in his arms, tucking her against his chest where his body heat could reach her fastest. "Nathan," the boy whispered. "Nathan Harper. And that's Nora. She's 6 months old. I'm Blake Austin. Can you walk, Nathan, or do you need me to carry you?" "I can walk." Nathan's chin came up slightly, that desperate pride of a child trying to prove he wasn't completely helpless. But his legs were shaking, his lips had gone pale, and Blake knew the boy was running on fumes. "Good. Stay close to me." Blake shifted Nora higher against his shoulder and started moving, his long strides eating up the distance toward the park exit. Nathan stumbled once, twice, and Blake slowed his pace despite the screaming urgency in his head that said get them warm, get them safe, get them inside. The 12 blocks to his building had never felt longer. Every step was a calculation. Fast enough to matter, slow enough that Nathan could keep up. Blake kept one hand secured around Nora, feeling the shallow flutter of her breathing, the weak movements that said she was still alive but fading. With his free hand, he pulled out his phone and dialed his building's concierge. "Mr. Austin." The voice was immediately alert, professional. "How can I?" "Medical emergency." Blake cut him off. "I'm 6 blocks out with 2 children suffering from exposure. I need you to call Dr. Richardson immediately and tell him to meet me at my penthouse. Tell him it's hypothermia. 1 infant approximately 6 months old, 1 child approximately 7 years old. Tell him I'm bringing them up now and he has 15 minutes to get there." "Yes, sir. Right away." Blake ended the call and focused on moving. Beside him, Nathan was breathing hard, his face tilted down against the wind, his small body hunched inside Blake's massive coat. The fur lining dragged on the ground behind him, and Blake felt a fierce satisfaction that the $10,000 coat was finally being used for something that mattered. The lobby of Austin Tower was blessedly warm, and Nathan made a small sound of relief as the heat hit him. Blake didn't slow down. He headed straight for the private elevator that served only the penthouse, keying in his code one-handed while keeping Nora pressed close. "We're almost there," Blake said, more to himself than to Nathan. "Just hold on." The elevator rose silently, 58 floors in under a minute, and then the doors opened directly into Blake's penthouse. The space was exactly as he'd left it that morning. Pristine, cold, untouched. Leather furniture in shades of gray and black. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city. Not a single personal item visible anywhere. It looked like a hotel suite, not a home, and Blake felt a flash of something almost like shame as he carried the children inside. "Sit," he told Nathan, nodding toward the long leather sofa. The boy obeyed immediately, collapsing onto the cushions with a shaky exhale. Blake laid Nora down on the sofa beside her brother, keeping his coat wrapped around both of them. The baby's face was still flushed that dangerous red, her cries barely audible now. Blake's penthouse had heated floors, climate control set to a steady 72 degrees, but he knew from the emergency response training he'd taken years ago that warming had to be gradual. Too fast and he could send them into shock. He moved quickly to his bedroom, stripped off his suit jacket, grabbed every blanket he owned from the closet, which wasn't many because Blake Austin didn't do cozy, and carried them back to the living room. Nathan was hunched on the sofa, shivering violently now that the adrenaline was wearing off. His lips were pale, his eyes glassy. Blake wrapped a cashmere throw around the boy's shoulders, then layered another blanket over Nora, creating a nest of warmth without overheating. "Nathan, I need you to stay awake for me," Blake said, crouching down so he was at eye level with the child. "Can you do that? Just until the doctor gets here." "I'm trying." Nathan's teeth were chattering. "Is Nora going to be okay?" "The doctor is on his way. He's the best." Blake kept his voice steady, alpha calm, the same tone he used in boardrooms when he needed people to believe him without question. "But I need to know, has she been wet? Did her diaper leak?" Nathan nodded miserably. "I tried to change her, but I didn't have another one. Mama only left one in the bag and I used it this morning." Blake bit back the surge of rage that wanted to rise in his throat. Not at Nathan, never at Nathan, but at the mother who had abandoned her pups in a snowstorm with inadequate supplies. He forced the anger down, locked it away for later. Right now, these children needed him focused. "Okay. We're going to fix that." Blake moved to his kitchen, immaculate, barely used, and filled a bowl with lukewarm water. He grabbed clean dish towels because he didn't have anything else, and brought everything back to the sofa. "I'm going to clean her up and get her dry," Blake explained to Nathan. "That'll help her warm up faster. Have you ever changed a diaper before?" Mama showed me once. Nathan's eyes were drooping despite his best efforts. Blake unwrapped Nora carefully, and the sight of her made his jaw tighten. The baby was soaked through, her skin mottled and cold, her tiny limbs barely moving. He worked quickly but gently, cleaning her with the warm water, patting her dry with the softest towel he owned. He didn't have diapers, didn't have baby clothes, didn't have any of the things a 6-month-old needed. But he had warmth and he had walls and he had the absolute determination that these pups were not going to suffer anymore. He wrapped Nora in a dry blanket, then pulled her against his chest, skin to skin under his shirt, the most efficient way to transfer body heat. She made a weak sound against his sternum, and Blake felt something crack open in his chest that he didn't have words for. The elevator chimed. Blake stood, still holding Nora, and watched as Dr. Richardson stepped out carrying a medical bag. The doctor was in his 60s, gray-haired and calm, and Blake had never been more grateful to see him. Blake. Richardson took one look at the scene and moved immediately into action. Talk to me. Infant, 6 months old, exposed to below freezing temperatures for approximately 4 to 6 hours. Wet diaper, inadequate clothing. Weak crying, lethargic. Older brother, 7 years old, similar exposure but mobile and alert. Blake rattled off the facts like a status report, because facts he could handle. Richardson was already examining Nora. His hands gentle and sure. You did the right thing bringing them here. Body heat, gradual warming, good instincts. He glanced at Nathan, who was watching with exhausted, terrified eyes. Let's get them stabilized. Blake stood back and let the doctor work, but he didn't leave. He couldn't leave. Every alpha instinct he possessed was locked onto these two small, vulnerable pups, and the thought of stepping away felt physically impossible. Richardson checked Nora's temperature, listened to her heart, examined her extremities. Then he moved to Nathan, repeating the process with quiet efficiency. Blake watched the boy try to be brave, try not to flinch, try to hold himself together even as his body betrayed him with violent shivers. They're going to be all right, Richardson said finally, and Blake felt tension he hadn't known he was carrying release from his shoulders. The baby needs to be monitored closely tonight, but her core temperature is rising. No frostbite, thank God. Nathan's in better shape, though he's dehydrated and exhausted. They both need fluids, food, and sleep. Whatever they need, Blake said immediately. Whatever it takes. Richardson gave him a long, assessing look. Blake, these children need more than emergency medicine. They need care. They need to be safe, Blake interrupted, his voice dropping into alpha command. And they're safe here. With me. The words hung in the air between them, a claim and a promise. Richardson studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right then. Let's get to work. If this story has held you this long, subscribing is how you help it continue. Thank you. Now back to the story. Dr. Richardson set up a makeshift examination area on Blake's dining table, the sleek glass surface now covered with medical equipment that looked jarringly out of place in the sterile penthouse. Blake watched as the doctor inserted an 4-line into Nora's tiny arm with practiced precision, the baby too weak to do more than whimper softly. The sound cut through Blake like a blade. The dehydration is my main concern, Richardson said, adjusting the flow rate on the 4-bag heat hung from Blake's modern chandelier. She's lost fluids from the cold exposure and the crying. We'll get her stabilized, but she needs to be watched closely for the next 12 hours. Blake nodded, his hand resting protectively on Nora's stomach as she lay wrapped in blankets on his sofa. The baby's color was improving, the dangerous red flush fading to something closer to normal pink, but her breathing was still too shallow for his liking. Nathan sat curled in the corner of the sofa, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, watching his sister with eyes that held too much fear for a 7-year-old. Richardson had given him warm broth and insisted he drink it slowly, and the boy obeyed with mechanical precision, his hands trembling around the mug. Nathan, Richardson said gently, pulling up a chair beside the sofa. I need to ask you some questions. Can you tell me what happened today? The boy's eyes flickered to Blake, seeking permission or maybe reassurance. Blake moved closer, settling onto the sofa beside him, and Nathan seemed to take strength from his presence. "Mama said she had an errand to run," Nathan began, his voice barely above a whisper. "She told us to wait on the bench in Henderson Park. She said she'd be right back." "What time was that?" Richardson asked. Nathan's face scrunched in concentration. "After lunch. Maybe 1 o'clock. We had sandwiches at home first. Mama made peanut butter and jelly." Blake's jaw tightened. 1 o'clock. That meant the children had been sitting in the freezing park for at least 6 hours, probably closer to 7. The temperature had been dropping since mid-afternoon, and by the time Blake found them at 8, it had been well below freezing. "Did your mother say where she was going?" Richardson continued, his tone carefully neutral. Nathan shook his head. "Just that it was an errand. She does that sometimes. Leaves us places and comes back later." His voice got smaller. "But she's never been gone this long before. And it's never been this cold." Blake felt something dark and dangerous unfurl in his chest. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a parent who got stuck in traffic or had car trouble. This was a pattern of neglect, and tonight it had nearly killed these pups. "Nathan, where's your father?" Blake asked, keeping his voice steady despite the rage simmering beneath his skin. "Don't have one." Nathan's shoulders hunched. "Mama says he left before Nora was born. Said he didn't want to be a dad." "What about other family? Grandparents, aunts, uncles?" Nathan shook his head again. "Mama's parents don't talk to her anymore. She said they kicked her out when she had me. And I don't know about my dad's family. Mama never talks about them." Richardson caught Blake's eye over Nathan's head, and the look they exchanged said everything. These children had no one. No safety net. No one who would notice they were missing except a mother who had abandoned them in a snowstorm. "Nathan, what's your mother's full name?" Richardson asked. "We need to contact her, let her know you're safe." "Tessa Harper." Nathan's hands twisted in the blanket. "But she doesn't have a phone right now. She said it got shut off because we couldn't pay the bill." Blake pulled out his own phone and stepped away from the sofa, his movements controlled despite the fury coursing through him. He dialed a number he hadn't used in months. "Marcus Chen," came the answer on the second ring. "Marcus, it's Blake Austin. I need you to run a background check for me. Tessa Harper, probably late 20s to early 30s, has a 7-year-old son named Nathan and a 6-month-old daughter named Nora. I need everything you can find, and I need it fast." Marcus didn't ask questions. He'd been Blake's head of security for 8 years and knew when his boss used that tone, it meant the situation was critical. "I'll have preliminary results within the hour." Blake ended the call and returned to find Richardson finishing his examination of Nathan. The doctor's expression was grim. "Mild hypothermia, dehydration and exhaustion," Richardson said quietly. "He's stable, but Blake, this child is undernourished. Not severely, but enough that I'd say meals have been inconsistent for a while. And look at his hands." Blake looked. Nathan's palms were calloused, the skin rough in a way that children's hands shouldn't be. The kind of wear that came from work, from carrying things too heavy, from taking on adult responsibilities. "He's been the one taking care of the baby," Blake said, and it wasn't a question. Richardson nodded. "I'd say so." "Nathan, have you been helping your mother with Nora?" Nathan's chin came up defensively. "Mama works a lot. Someone has to watch Nora. I don't mind. I'm good at it. I can change diapers and make bottles and everything." 7 years old, Blake thought, and this child had been functioning as a parent to an infant. The rage in his chest burned hotter, but he forced it down. Nathan needed calm right now, not anger, even if that anger wasn't directed at him. "You've done an incredible job," Blake said, and meant it. "Nora's alive because of you. You kept her safe as long as you could." Nathan's brave facade crumbled at the praise, and tears started sliding down his cheeks. "I tried so hard. But I didn't know what to do when she got so cold. I was scared she was going to die and it would be my fault. Blake moved without thinking, gathering the small Omega into his arms and holding him while he cried. Nathan clung to him with desperate strength, and Blake felt that crack in his chest widen further. This wasn't supposed to happen to him. He didn't do this, didn't get attached, didn't let people in, didn't feel this protective fury that made him want to tear the world apart to keep these pups safe. But here he was, holding a sobbing child and making silent promises that he wasn't sure he had the right to make. Richardson gave them space, moving to check on Nora again. The baby was sleeping now, her breathing deeper and more regular, the four delivering fluids that her small body desperately needed. She looked impossibly tiny on Blake's massive leather sofa, surrounded by blankets that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Blake's phone buzzed. He reluctantly released Nathan, making sure the boy was settled back against the cushions before checking the message. It was from Marcus, and it was worse than Blake had imagined. Tessa Harper, age 29. 3 eviction notices in the past 2 years. Multiple complaints from landlords about neglect and unsanitary conditions. 2 documented CPS visits, both closed without removal of the children due to insufficient evidence. A string of short-term jobs, none lasting more than 3 months. And most damning, a warrant out for her arrest on charges of possession with intent to distribute. Blake's blood ran cold. Tessa Harper wasn't coming back for her children because she couldn't. If she showed her face anywhere near them, she'd be arrested. She'd left them in that park to freeze because it was easier than dealing with the consequences of her choices. Nathan, Blake said carefully, crouching down beside the sofa again. I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me. Has your mother ever asked you to hold packages for her? Things she said not to open or tell anyone about. Nathan's eyes went wide with fear. I'm not supposed to talk about that. Mama said it was private family business. You're not in trouble, Blake said quickly. His alpha voice dropping into that register that demanded trust. I promise. But I need to know if there are things in your home that might be dangerous. There's a box, Nathan whispered. Under Mama's bed. She said never to touch it. Never to let anyone see it. She got really mad once when I moved it by accident. Blake exchanged a look with Richardson. The doctor's expression was grave. Nathan, I don't think your mother is coming back tonight, Blake said, choosing his words carefully. I think something happened that's keeping her away. But that means you and Nora need somewhere safe to stay. Would you like to stay here with me until we figure things out? Nathan looked around the penthouse with uncertain eyes. But we don't have our stuff. Nora needs diapers and formula and her blanket. And I need my homework. I have a test on Friday. The casual mention of homework in the midst of this crisis nearly broke Blake's composure. This child had been abandoned in the freezing cold. His baby sister nearly died, and he was worried about a test. I'll make sure you have everything you need, Blake promised. Diapers, formula, clothes, school supplies. Everything. You just focus on resting right now. What if Mama comes looking for us? Nathan's voice was small, conflicted. What if she goes to the park and we're not there? Blake's phone buzzed again. Another message from Marcus. Asterisk Tessa Harper arrested 2 hours ago. Polk Street bust. Won't make bail asterisk. If your mother is looking for you, she'll find you, Blake said, which was technically true. When Tessa Harper eventually got out of whatever legal hole she dug herself into, Blake would make damn sure she knew exactly where her children were and why she'd never get her hands on them again. But right now you're safe. That's what matters. Richardson cleared his throat. Blake, can I speak with you privately? They moved to the kitchen, out of Nathan's earshot. The doctor kept his voice low. You know you can't just keep these children without legal authority. CPS needs to be notified. There are procedures. I'm aware of the procedures, Blake cut him off. I'm also aware that if we call CPS tonight, Nathan and Nora will be separated and placed in emergency foster care within the hour. Nora's not stable enough for that kind of disruption, and Nathan's been through enough trauma for one day. Blake, I understand the impulse to protect them, but they stay here tonight, Blake said, and his voice carried alpha command that made Richardson's objections die on his tongue. Tomorrow morning, I'll call my lawyers. We'll do this properly, legally. But tonight, these pups are under my protection. Are we clear? Richardson studied him for a long moment, then sighed. You're going to have a hell of a fight ahead of you if you're serious about this. I'm serious, Blake said, surprised by how much he meant it. 12 hours ago, his life had been ordered, controlled, empty. Now there were 2 abandoned pups in his living room, and every instinct Blake possessed was screaming that they were his to protect. And I don't lose fights. Richardson nodded slowly. All right. I'll stay through the night to monitor Nora. You should get some sleep, but I suspect you won't. You suspect correctly. Blake looked back toward the living room where Nathan had curled up on the sofa, his small hand resting on Nora's blanket, keeping watch even as his own eyes drooped with exhaustion. I need to make some calls. He pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant. Jennifer, I need you to clear my schedule for the rest of the week. Cancel everything. The Tokyo negotiations, the board presentation, all of it. There was a shocked pause. Sir, the Tokyo deal has been in negotiation for 6 months. If you don't, then they'll wait, Blake interrupted. Family emergency. That's all anyone needs to know. He ended the call before she could argue and stood in his kitchen, looking out at his pristine penthouse that was about to become something very different. 2 children who needed him. 2 pups who had no one else. And Blake Austin, Ruthless Alpha CEO, who had just appended his entire carefully controlled life because a small voice in the dark had said, Sir, my baby pup is freezing. He didn't regret it for a second. Blake stood in the baby section of Nordstrom at 7 in the morning, surrounded by more products than he'd known existed. Diapers came in sizes he didn't understand. Formula had different stages and types. There were approximately 40 different varieties of bottles, each claiming to be essential for infant development. He pulled out his phone and called the one person he trusted to cut through chaos. Marcus, I need a consultant. Someone who specializes in infant care. I need them at my penthouse within the hour. And I need them to be the best. By 8:30, Blake's dining room had been transformed into a command center. Laura Chen, a former pediatric nurse who now consulted for high-net-worth families, sat across from him with a tablet and a no-nonsense expression that Blake appreciated immediately. Let me be clear about what you're asking for, Laura said, her fingers flying across her screen. You want me to help you care for a 6-month-old infant and a 7-year-old child, neither of whom are legally in your custody, both of whom have experienced significant trauma. Is that correct? Yes, Blake said simply. And you have 0 experience with children? Correct. Laura studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, let's start with the basics. Show me what you bought. Blake gestured to the bags covering his kitchen counter. He'd essentially bought out 3 sections of the store, operating on the principle that if he didn't know what he needed, he'd get everything and sort it out later. Laura began unpacking, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to something almost impressed. Well, you certainly didn't hold back. These are good choices, actually. Someone helped you. The sales associate took pity on me, Blake admitted. I told her it was an emergency. Smart. Laura pulled out diapers, wipes, bottles, formula. Okay, first lesson. Nora is 6 months old, which means she's likely started solid foods, but given her nutritional state, we'll focus on formula for now. She needs to eat every 3 to 4 hours. Can you handle that schedule? Blake thought of the conference calls he'd cancelled, the $1 million deals he'd put on hold. I can handle it. Good. Now let me show you how to make a bottle. For the next hour, Blake Austin, who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers and made grown men nervous in boardrooms, learned how to properly measure formula, test bottle temperature on his wrist, and support an infant's head while feeding. Laura was patient but exacting, correcting his grip, his angle, his pace. Blake absorbed every detail like he was studying a crucial contract because in a way he was. These children's lives depended on him getting this right. Nathan wandered into the kitchen around 9. His hair sticking up at odd angles, wearing one of Blake's t-shirts that hung to his knees like a dress. He stopped when he saw Laura, his body tensing with the wariness of a child who'd learned not to trust strangers. "Nathan, this is Laura," Blake said, keeping his voice calm. "She's here to help me take care of you and Nora properly. Is that okay?" Nathan's eyes flickered between them, then settled on Blake. "Is she going to take us away?" The question landed like a punch. Blake moved closer, crouching down to Nathan's level. "No one is taking you anywhere. You're staying here with me. Laura is just teaching me how to be better at taking care of babies, because I'll be honest, I'm not very good at it yet." Something in Nathan's expression softened. "You kept Nora alive last night. That's pretty good. That was Dr. Richardson's expertise, not mine. But I'm learning." Blake gestured to the kitchen counter. "Are you hungry? I had breakfast delivered." Nathan nodded, and Blake watched as the boy approached the spread of food cautiously. Bagels, fruit, eggs, bacon. Nathan took small portions like he was afraid to take too much, and Blake made a mental note to discuss that with Laura later. "Nathan," Laura said gently, "Blake told me you've been helping take care of Nora. That's a really big job for someone your age. Would you be willing to show me how you usually do things? It would help me help Blake." Nathan looked uncertain but finally nodded. "I guess so." Over the next 20 minutes, Blake watched as Nathan demonstrated his routine. How he warmed bottles, how he held Nora, how he changed her diaper. The boy's movements were practiced but careful, and Laura's expression grew more serious with each passing minute. "Nathan, you've done an amazing job," Laura said finally. "But I want you to know something important. Taking care of a baby isn't your responsibility anymore. That's Blake's job now. Your job is to be 7 years old. Do you understand?" Nathan's eyes filled with tears. "But what if something happens to Nora and I'm not watching her?" "Then I'll be watching her," Blake said firmly. "Or Laura will be, or Dr. Richardson. Nora has adults taking care of her now. You don't have to carry that weight anymore." Nathan's face crumpled, and Blake pulled him into a hug as the boy cried. This was relief, Blake realized. Nathan had been holding himself together through sheer force of will, and now that someone had told him he could let go, everything was pouring out. Laura excused herself quietly, giving them space. When Nathan's tears finally subsided, Blake kept one arm around the boy's shoulders. "How about we make a deal?" Blake said. "I'll learn how to take care of Nora, and you teach me what she likes. You know her better than anyone. But you don't have to be responsible for her safety anymore. Can we do that?" Nathan nodded against Blake's shoulder. "Okay." The morning continued in a blur of learning. Laura showed Blake how to bathe Nora in the sink. He didn't have a baby tub yet, but she assured him the kitchen sink would work fine with towels for padding. She taught him how to check for diaper rash, how to interpret different types of cries, how to create a sleep schedule. Blake took notes on his phone like he was documenting a merger strategy. Around noon, Nathan wandered over to Blake's floor-to-ceiling windows and pressed his nose against the glass, looking out at the city sprawled below. "You can see everything from up here," Nathan said quietly. "It's like being in space." Blake looked up from the bottle he was preparing. "You interested in space?" Nathan's whole face transformed. "I love space. I have a book about planets at home. Well, I had one. I don't know if we can go back for it." "What's your favorite planet?" Blake asked, filing away the information about the book. "Saturn because of the rings. But I also really like Jupiter because it has that huge storm that's been going for hundreds of years. The Great Red Spot. Did you know that storm is bigger than Earth?" Blake hadn't known that, actually, but he was fascinated by the way Nathan's entire demeanor changed when talking about something he loved. The fear and exhaustion faded, replaced by genuine excitement and intelligence that belied his 7 years. "How did you learn all that?" Blake asked. Nathan shrugged. "I read a lot. The library has books about space and sometimes they have programs. I went to one once where they showed us pictures from the Hubble telescope. It was the best day ever. Blake pulled out his phone and texted Marcus again. Within minutes, his head of security had sent back a list of age-appropriate spacebooks, complete with expedited delivery options. "What else do you like to read about?" Blake asked. "Dinosaurs. And how things work. I took apart Mama's old radio once to see inside. She got mad, but I learned about circuits." Nathan's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "I couldn't put it back together though. I wasn't smart enough." "You were smart enough to take it apart in the first place," Blake said. "That's impressive for someone your age. Do you like building things?" "I don't know. We never had building toys. Just some old blocks." Blake made another note on his phone. By the time Laura left at 2 o'clock, Blake had a shopping list that would require multiple deliveries, a feeding schedule color-coded in his calendar, and a new appreciation for how much work went into keeping a tiny human alive. "You're doing well," Laura said at the door. "Better than most first-timers. But Blake, there's something you need to consider." "What?" "These children need more than just physical care. Nathan especially. He's been parentified, forced to take on adult responsibilities at an age when he should be playing and learning. He's gonna need therapy, probably for a while. And you need to prepare yourself for the fact that his behavior might get worse before it gets better." "Worse how?" "Right now, he's in survival mode. He's being compliant and helpful because he doesn't know if he's safe yet. Once he starts to feel secure, all that suppressed emotion is going to come out. Anger, fear, grief. It won't be pretty." Blake nodded slowly. "Can you recommend someone? A therapist who specializes in trauma?" Laura pulled out her phone. "I'll send you 3 names. All excellent with children. All discreet. Call them today." After she left, Blake found Nathan curled up on the sofa near where Nora was sleeping in the nest of blankets they'd created. The boy had one of Blake's tablets and was watching a documentary about the Mars rover. "Nathan," Blake said, settling onto the sofa beside him, "I have a question for you. If you could have any toy or game or book in the world, what would you want?" Nathan looked suspicious. "Why?" "Because I'm going to get you some things to make this feel more like home. And I want to know what you'd actually enjoy, not what I think you should have." Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "A telescope. I've always wanted to see the stars up close. But those are expensive. Mama said we couldn't afford it." "What if money wasn't a problem?" Blake asked. "What if you could have anything?" "A telescope," Nathan repeated firmly. "And maybe some books about astronauts. Real ones about the people who went to space. And..." He hesitated. "Could Nora have some toys too? Ones that are new and not broken? Mama bought most of her stuff at yard sales." Blake felt that now familiar crack in his chest widen further. This child's first thought, even when given carte blanche, was for his baby sister. "Nora will have everything she needs," Blake promised. "And Nathan, you're getting that telescope." He pulled out his phone and called Marcus for what felt like the 100th time that day. "I need a telescope. Child-friendly but high quality. And I need it today." "Blake, it's almost 3 on a Wednesday. So that gives you plenty of time," Blake said. "Also, I need recommendations for child therapists who specialize in trauma. And I need contractor references. I'm converting my home office into a bedroom." There was a pause. "Blake, what exactly is happening?" "I'm becoming a father," Blake said, and the words felt strange and right all at once. "Figure it out." He ended the call and looked at Nathan, who was staring at him with wide eyes. "You're really going to get me a telescope?" "I'm really going to get you a telescope," Blake confirmed. "And tomorrow we're going to figure out how to see the stars from up here. Maybe from the roof." Nathan's smile was hesitant but real, the first genuine expression of happiness Blake had seen from him. It transformed his whole face, made him look like the 7-year-old child he actually was instead of the miniature adult he'd been forced to become. That night, after Nora had been fed and changed and was sleeping peacefully, After Nathan had explored every corner of the penthouse with cautious curiosity, after Blake had fumbled his way through his first solo diaper change with only moderate disaster, he stood at his windows looking out at the city lights. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from his office, his board, his business partners. All of them wanting to know what was so important that Blake Austin had cancelled a week of critical meetings. He thought about his answer to Marcus earlier. I'm becoming a father. He'd built an empire with ruthless efficiency. He'd crushed competitors and dominated markets. He'd accumulated wealth that most people couldn't comprehend. But standing in his penthouse with 2 sleeping children who had no one else in the world, Blake realized that everything he'd built before this moment had just been preparation. These 2 vulnerable pups who trusted him with their lives. This was what he was meant to protect. His phone rang. Jennifer, his assistant, her voice tight with stress. Sir, Tokyo is threatening to walk if you don't personally attend tomorrow's negotiation. The deal is worth $800 million. Blake looked back at the sofa where Nathan had fallen asleep next to Nora's blanket nest. One small hand still resting protectively on his sister's shoulder even in sleep. Let them walk, Blake said. I'm exactly where I need to be. He ended the call and powered off his phone. For the first time in 15 years, Blake Austin's empire would have to function without him. Because he'd found something worth more than any deal, any merger, any amount of money. He'd found his pack. Blake was teaching Nathan how to identify constellations through the telescope when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. It had been 11 days since he'd found the children in Henderson Park. 11 days of learning to read Nora's different cries and helping Nathan with his homework and discovering that a 7-year-old's questions about black holes could be more challenging than any board meeting he'd ever attended. He almost didn't answer. But something made him swipe to accept. Mr. Austin. The voice was female, rough around the edges, with an undercurrent of barely contained desperation. This is Tessa Harper. I believe you have my children. Blake's entire body went rigid. Nathan looked up from the telescope, his expression immediately shifting to fear at whatever he saw in Blake's face. Blake forced himself to keep his voice calm. Nathan, why don't you go check on Nora? I think she's waking up from her nap. Nathan hesitated, clearly wanting to stay, but he obeyed. The moment the boy was out of earshot, Blake's voice dropped into the cold, lethal tone that had made adversaries back down in boardrooms across 3 continents. Ms. Harper, how interesting that you've finally decided to inquire about your children's well-being. It's been 11 days since you abandoned them in sub-zero temperatures. I'm curious what took you so long. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. I didn't abandon them. I had an emergency situation that I couldn't. Look, I don't have to explain myself to you. They're my kids. I want them back. I'm afraid that's not going to happen. You can't keep my children from me. I'll call the police. I'll call CPS. You have no legal right. I have every legal right, Blake interrupted, his voice like ice. I have emergency foster placement approved by the state as of 4 days ago. I have documentation of severe neglect, including photographs of the hypothermic state in which I found your children. I have a statement from Nathan detailing your pattern of abandonment. And most interestingly, Ms. Harper, I have a complete record of your arrest for possession with intent to distribute, which occurred approximately 2 hours before I found your children freezing to death in a public park. Silence. Then, that was a misunderstanding. The charges were dropped. The charges were reduced in exchange for your cooperation with a larger investigation, Blake corrected. Don't insult my intelligence. I know exactly what kind of business you were conducting, and I know you left your children in that park because you knew you were about to be arrested. You chose to protect yourself instead of them. I was trying to protect them, Tessa shot back, her voice rising. Do you have any idea what those people would have done if I'd brought my kids with me? I left them somewhere safe. Safe. Blake's control cracked slightly, alpha rage bleeding into his words. A public park bench in a snowstorm with inadequate clothing and no supplies is your definition of safe. Your daughter was in hypothermic shock. She could have died. Your son watched her suffering for 6 hours, believing it was his fault he couldn't save her. What part of that scenario suggests safety? I didn't think it would get that cold that fast, Tessa said, but her voice had lost its edge. I thought I'd be back before. But you weren't back. You weren't there. And your children have no idea if you're ever coming back, because according to Nathan, this isn't the first time you've left them alone for extended periods. This is just the first time your neglect nearly killed them. Another silence, longer this time. When Tessa spoke again, her tone had shifted to something calculating. Fine. You've made your point. But here's mine, those kids are mine legally. You might have some temporary custody arrangement, but I'm their mother. Have rights. And unless you want me to make this very ugly and very public, you're going to compensate me for my cooperation. There it was. Blake felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. He'd been waiting for this moment, had anticipated it from the second Marcus's background check revealed Tessa Harper's history of small-time cons and manipulation. She wasn't calling because she wanted her children back. She was calling because she'd realized Blake Austin was a billionaire and she saw an opportunity. Let me make sure I understand, Blake said softly. You're attempting to extort money from me in exchange for your children. I'm not extorting anyone. I'm just saying that if you want to keep Nathan and Nora, if you want me to voluntarily terminate my parental rights without a fight, then maybe you should consider how much that's worth to you. Because if we go to court, this is going to cost you a hell of a lot more in legal fees. And the media would love a story about a billionaire trying to steal a poor single mother's children. Blake smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Ms. Harper, you've made a critical error in judgment. You've assumed I'm someone who can be threatened. Let me correct that misconception. He walked to his study, pulled out a file that his legal team had prepared days ago, and opened it. I have 3 investigative firms currently compiling evidence of your criminal activities over the past 5 years. I have testimony from 4 landlords detailing the conditions in which your children were living. I have medical records showing Nathan's malnutrition and developmental delays consistent with chronic neglect. I have financial records proving you've been using SNAP benefits designated for your children to support your drug purchases. You can't prove. I can prove all of it, Blake cut her off. And if you force me to go to court, I will present every piece of evidence in excruciating detail. I will make sure every newspaper, every media outlet, every parent in this city knows exactly what kind of mother you are. Your face will be synonymous with child abuse. You'll never be able to walk down a street without people recognizing you as the woman who left her baby to freeze. You're bluffing. I never bluff, Ms. Harper. Ask anyone who's negotiated with me. I make promises and I keep them. Blake's voice dropped lower. But let me make you a different promise. If you voluntarily terminate your parental rights and disappear from these children's lives permanently, I will ensure you have a clean slate. I'll have the drug charges reduced to a minor misdemeanor. I'll provide you with a one-time payment of $50,000 and a reference letter that will help you start over somewhere far from here. You'll never have to see your children again, and they'll never have to see you. 50,000. Tessa's voice was greedy now. That's it. You're a billionaire. You can afford more than $50,000 or public destruction. Those are your options. Choose quickly, because my patience is not unlimited. Blake heard breathing on the other end, could almost feel Tessa's mind working through the calculation. She didn't love her children, that much was clear. They'd always been burdens to her, responsibilities she'd never wanted. Now someone was offering her a way out with cash in hand. I want 75,000, Tessa said finally. 60,000. Final offer. Push me again and I'll withdraw everything and bury you in court for the next 2 years. More silence. Then quietly. Fine. 60,000. My lawyers will have the paperwork ready by tomorrow morning. You'll sign a complete termination of parental rights for both children. You'll agree to a permanent restraining order that prevents you from coming within 500 feet of Nathan or Nora. You'll waive any future claims to custody, visitation, or contact. And most importantly, You'll include a statement for them to read when they're older, explaining that this decision was yours, not theirs, and that they bear no responsibility for your absence. A statement? Tessa laughed bitterly. What am I supposed to say? Sorry, I was a terrible mother. Have a nice life. Say whatever you want, as long as it absolves them of guilt, Blake said coldly. Those children have carried the weight of your failures for too long. The least you can do is tell them explicitly that your inadequacy is not their fault. Fine. Whatever. When do I get the money? When the papers are signed and filed with the court. Not before. My lawyers will contact you with a location. Don't be late, Ms. Harper. This is the only generous offer you're going to get from me. He ended the call before she could respond and stood in his study, hands clenched into fists, fighting the urge to put his fist through the wall. The rage was so intense it nearly choked him, not just at Tessa's calculated greed, but at the entire situation. Those children deserved better than a mother who would sell them for cash. They deserved safety and love and a parent who would burn the world down to protect them. Blake took a slow breath, forcing the alpha fury back down where it belonged, and returned to the living room. Nathan was sitting on the sofa with Nora in his lap, both of them watching him with wide, anxious eyes. Nathan had clearly heard enough to know something was wrong. Was that Mama? Nathan asked, his voice very small. Blake sat down beside them, choosing his words carefully. Yes, that was your mother. She called to check on you. Does she want us back? The fear in Nathan's voice was palpable, and Blake realized with a shock that the boy wasn't afraid of being taken away from Tessa. He was afraid of being taken away from Blake. No, Blake said gently. She doesn't. She's going to sign some papers that say I can take care of you permanently. Would that be okay with you? Nathan's eyes filled with tears. Really? We can stay here. With you. If you want to. Both of you. Forever. Nathan launched himself at Blake, wrapping his thin arms around Blake's neck and crying into his shoulder. I want to stay. Please don't let her take us. Please. Blake held the boy close, one hand cradling Nora, who had started fussing at the sudden emotion. I won't let anyone take you. Promise. You're my pack now. Mine to protect. What's pack mean? Nathan asked, pulling back to look at Blake's face. It means family. Means belonging. It means that no matter what happens, you'll always have a place here. With me. Nathan nodded, then wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Okay. That's good. He paused, then asked in a whisper, Blake? Are you going to be our dad? The question hit Blake harder than he'd expected. He'd been called many things in his life. Alpha, CEO, bastard, genius, ruthless. But dad. That was new territory. Terrifying territory. And somehow, the most right thing anyone had ever asked him. If you want me to be, Blake said. I know I'm not very good at it yet. I'm still learning. But I'm trying. You're good at it, Nathan said with the absolute certainty of a 7-year-old. You kept us safe. You got me a telescope. You help me with my homework even when you don't understand my questions about space. That's what dads do. Blake felt something in his chest that might have been his heart breaking and healing at the same time. Then yes, I'll be your dad. And Nora's dad. If that's what you want. It's what I want, Nathan confirmed. Then more hesitantly, can I call you dad? Or is that weird? You can call me whatever feels right to you. Nathan thought about this seriously for a moment, then nodded. Dad then. Because Blake sounds like you're my teacher or something. Blake pulled both children close, Nathan tucked against his side and Nora in his arms, and for the first time in his adult life, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not in a boardroom. Not closing a deal. But here, in his penthouse that had slowly transformed from a sterile showcase into a home, with 2 pups who needed him and trusted him and called him dad. His phone buzzed with a message from his lead attorney. Asterisk papers ready for tomorrow. We'll handle everything. You're doing the right thing. Asterisk. Blake looked down at Nathan, who had fallen asleep against his shoulder, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the day. Nora had dozed off as well, her small hand fisted in Blake's shirt. They looked peaceful. If loved. Tessa Harper would sign the papers tomorrow and disappear with her $60,000. She'd probably spend it within 6 months and find new ways to destroy her life. But Nathan and Nora would be here, in this penthouse that now had toys scattered across the floor and children's books on the shelves, and a telescope by the window pointing at the stars. Blake had spent 15 years building an empire. But these 2 sleeping children who trusted him with their entire world, this was the only thing he'd ever built that actually mattered. And anyone who tried to take them from him would learn exactly how ruthless Blake Austin could be when protecting his pack. The judge's gavel came down with a sound that echoed through the courtroom like thunder, and Blake felt something fundamental shift in his chest. 2 years of legal procedures, home studies, psychological evaluations, and endless paperwork had finally culminated in this single moment. "The adoption is finalized," Judge Morrison said, her stern expression softening as she looked at Blake and the 2 children sitting beside him. "Congratulations, Mr. Austin. Nathan and Nora are officially and legally your children." Nathan, now 9 years old and wearing the suit Blake had bought him specifically for this occasion, grabbed Blake's hand and squeezed hard. His eyes were shining with tears he was trying desperately not to shed in front of the courtroom full of people. Nora, 2.5 years old with her mother's brown eyes but none of her cruelty, bounced in Blake's lap and announced loudly, "We're forever now." "Yes, sweetheart," Blake said, his voice rough with emotion he didn't bother hiding. "We're forever now." The courtroom erupted in applause. Blake's legal team, who had become something close to friends over the past 2 years, were grinning. Dr. Richardson sat in the back row with Laura Chen, both of them beaming. Even Marcus, who rarely showed emotion about anything, had what might have been moisture in his eyes. Outside the courthouse, December snow was falling again, but this time it felt different. Not punishing or dangerous, but clean and beautiful, a reminder of how far they'd come from that night 2 years ago when Blake had found 2 freezing children on a park bench and made a choice that changed everything. "Dad," Nathan said, tugging on Blake's sleeve as they walked down the courthouse steps. "Can we go to the planetarium today? To celebrate?" Blake smiled. Nathan had been obsessed with space for as long as Blake had known him, but in the past 2 years, that obsession had bloomed into genuine talent. The boy devoured books on astrophysics, attended every lecture the local university offered, and had recently won his school's science fair with a project on exoplanets. Blake had already started making quiet donations to ensure Nathan would have access to the best educational opportunities when the time came. "Actually," Blake said, "I have something better planned." Nathan's eyes went wide. "Better than the planetarium? What could be better than the planetarium?" "You'll see." 2 hours later, Blake pulled his car into the driveway of a house he'd purchased 6 months ago but had kept secret until now. It was a large craftsman-style home in a quiet neighborhood with good schools, a yard big enough for children to play, and, most importantly, a deck on the roof that had been specifically modified for stargazing. "Why are we here?" Nathan asked, confused. "Whose house is this?" "Ours," Blake said simply. "If you want it to be." Nathan stared at him, then at the house, then back at Blake. "What do you mean, ours?" Blake unbuckled Nora from her car seat and led both children up the front walk. He'd had the house furnished and decorated over the past month, working with Laura and a child psychologist to create spaces that felt warm and safe. Nothing like the sterile penthouse they'd been living in, though even that had slowly transformed over 2 years of toy cars on the floor and crayon drawings on the refrigerator. He unlocked the front door and watched Nathan's face as the boys stepped inside. The living room had comfortable furniture in warm colors, bookshelves already filled with Nathan's expanding library, and large windows that let in natural light. There was a proper playroom for Nora, filled with age-appropriate toys and a reading nook with cushions. The kitchen was open and inviting, designed for family meals rather than catered dinners. "This is incredible," Nathan breathed, moving from room to room with wonder in his eyes. "But Dad, the penthouse." "The penthouse was where we started," Blake said. But it was never really home, was it? It was too much like a hotel. I wanted you to have a real house. A place with a yard where you can play. Neighbors your own age. A normal life. Nathan's eyes filled with tears. But what about you? Don't you need to be downtown for work? I need to be where my family is, Blake corrected. Everything else is negotiable. It was true. Over the past 2 years, Blake had restructured his entire life. He'd promoted a new COO to handle day-to-day operations, implemented policies that allowed him to work from home 3 days a week, and ruthlessly cut anything that took time away from his children. Some of his board members had predicted disaster. Instead, Austin Industries had thrived. Turned out that having something to come home to made Blake more focused and efficient during the hours he did work. Nathan threw his arms around Blake's waist, and Blake held him close, still marveling at how much the boy had grown in 2 years. He was taller now, healthier, with color in his cheeks and light in his eyes that had been absent that first night. Therapy had helped. Dr. Sarah Chan was a miracle worker who'd guided Nathan through his trauma with patience and skill. There had been hard days. Days when Nathan's suppressed fear and anger had exploded in tantrums and tears. Days when he'd tested Blake's commitment, pushing boundaries to see if Blake would abandon him like his mother had. Blake had never wavered. Not once. "There's more," Blake said when Nathan finally pulled back. "Come upstairs." He led them to the second floor, where there were 3 bedrooms. Blake's master suite was practical and comfortable. Nora's room was a wonderland of soft colors and stuffed animals, and a mural of a fairy tale forest that Blake had commissioned specifically for her. But Nathan's room. Nathan stopped in the doorway and made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. The walls were painted deep blue, fading to black near the ceiling, with glow-in-the-dark stars arranged in accurate constellations. There was a desk with a high-powered computer for research, shelves for his ever-expanding book collection, and a comfortable reading chair by the window. But the centerpiece was a door that led to a private section of the roof deck, outfitted with a professional-grade telescope that probably cost more than some people's cars. "Is that?" Nathan couldn't finish the sentence. "A 12-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope with computerized tracking," Blake confirmed. "I had an astronomer from the university help me choose it. He said it's appropriate for serious amateur work, and if you decide you want to pursue astronomy professionally, this will give you a significant advantage." Nathan walked to the telescope like he was approaching something sacred, his hands trembling as he touched the smooth metal. "Dad, this is too much. This must have cost." "Don't worry about the cost," Blake said firmly. "I've spent money on a lot of meaningless things in my life. Spending it on your dreams isn't one of them." Nathan turned and launched himself at Blake, crying openly now. Blake held him, this brilliant, brave child who'd survived so much and somehow remained kind and curious and full of hope. After a while, Nora wiggled between them, not wanting to be left out, and Blake gathered her up too, holding both his children close. "Forever Pack," Nora said seriously, patting Blake's face with her small hand. "That's what we are." "That's exactly what we are," Blake agreed. That night, after they'd explored every corner of the house, after they'd ordered pizza for dinner because Blake still wasn't great at cooking but was learning, after Nora had been bathed and put to bed with her favorite story, Blake found Nathan on the roof deck with his new telescope pointed at the winter sky. "Find anything interesting?" Blake asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Jupiter," Nathan said without taking his eye from the lens. "I can see 3 of the moons. Dad, this is amazing. I can actually see them." Blake watched his son's face, illuminated by the soft red light they used to preserve night vision, and felt profound gratitude for that December night 2 years ago. For the decision to walk through Henderson Park. For hearing that small, desperate voice in the dark. For every choice he'd made since that had led to this moment. "Nathan, do you remember that night I found you and Nora?" Nathan pulled back from the telescope, his expression growing serious. "Yeah. I remember all of it. Do you ever think about your mother?" It was a question they discussed in therapy, a question Blake knew Nathan struggled with. The boy was quiet for a long moment, looking up at the stars. Sometimes, Nathan admitted. Dr. Chen says it's okay to have complicated feelings about her. That I can be angry at her for leaving us but also wish she'd been different. He paused. I read the letter she wrote. The one she left when she signed the papers. Blake had known this day would come. He'd kept the letter Tessa had written, sealed in an envelope, waiting for when Nathan was ready. What did you think of it? She said she was sorry. That she knew she wasn't a good mom and that we deserved better. She said leaving us was the only good thing she ever did for us because it meant we found you. Nathan's voice was steady, but Blake could hear the pain underneath. I think she meant it. But it still hurts. That's okay, Blake said gently. It's okay for it to hurt. She was your mother, and part of you probably wanted her to choose you. But Nathan, her inability to be what you needed, that was never your fault. You understand that, right? I do now, Nathan said. It took a while. But yeah, I get it. He looked at Blake with eyes that held wisdom beyond his 9 years. You chose us. Even when you didn't have to. Even when we were just some random kids in a park. You chose us, and you keep choosing us every day. Blake's throat tightened. You made it easy. Both of you. You gave me something I didn't even know I was missing. What's that? Purpose, Blake said. I built a company and made a fortune and thought that was success. But it was empty. There was no warmth in it, no meaning. Then I found you and Nora, and suddenly everything made sense. You two are the best thing that ever happened to me. Nathan smiled, that brilliant, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. You're the best thing that ever happened to us too, Dad. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. In the house below, Nora was sleeping safely in her bed. Tomorrow, Nathan would go to school and tell all his friends about his new telescope. Blake would go to work and handle whatever crisis had developed in his absence, then come home to homework help and dinner and bath time negotiations with a stubborn toddler. It was ordinary. It was messy. It was nothing like the controlled, pristine life Blake had lived before. It was everything. Dad, Nathan said after a while. Do you think there are other kids out there like we were? Scared and cold and thinking nobody cares about them. Blake looked at his son, seeing the empathy and concern that had survived despite everything Nathan had endured. Probably. Why? Maybe when I'm older we could do something about that. Like set up a foundation or something. To help kids who don't have anyone. Blake felt pride swell in his chest. This child, who had every reason to be bitter and broken, was thinking about how to help others. I think that's a brilliant idea. We could start planning it whenever you're ready. Cool. Nathan returned to his telescope, adjusting the focus. For now though, I'm just going to look at stars and be happy we're forever. Forever, Blake agreed. He stayed on the roof deck with Nathan until the boy's eyes started drooping, then guided him inside to bed. As Blake tucked him in, something he'd never imagined doing 2 years ago but now couldn't imagine not doing, Nathan grabbed his hand. Thank you for saving us, Nathan whispered. Thank you for letting me, Blake whispered back. Later, after checking on Nora one more time and confirming both his children were safely asleep, Blake stood in the living room of their new house and looked at the evidence of their life together. Nathan's science fair trophy on the mantel. Nora's drawings covering the refrigerator. Toys in the corner. Books on every surface. Photographs on the walls. Professional ones and candid snapshots. Documenting 2 years of birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesdays that meant everything. His phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Asterisk congratulations on the adoption. Those kids are lucky to have you. Asterisk. Blake typed back. I'm the lucky one. And he meant it. Blake Austin had built an empire from nothing, had accumulated more wealth than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, had accomplished everything he'd set out to achieve in business. But standing in this house with 2 children sleeping upstairs who called him Dad, who trusted him completely, who had transformed his sterile existence into something warm and meaningful, this was his greatest success. 2 years ago, a small voice in the dark had said, "Sir, my baby pup is freezing." Blake had wrapped them in his coat and brought them home, never imagining how completely they would claim his heart. Now they were his forever pack. His children. His purpose. His everything. And Blake Austin, Ruthless Alpha CEO who had never needed anyone, couldn't imagine his life without them. Outside, snow continued to fall on the city, soft and gentle, covering everything in clean white. But inside their new house, Blake's children slept warm and safe and loved, secure in the knowledge that they would never be cold or alone again. Blake checked the locks one final time, set the alarm and headed upstairs to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, new opportunities to be the father his children deserved. But tonight, he simply stood in the doorway of each child's room, watching them sleep, marveling at the miracle that had brought them into his life. "Forever," he whispered into the darkness. "My pack, my family, forever." And finally, for the first time in his adult life, Blake Austin's world was full of exactly the warmth he needed. Thank you for joining the pack today. If this story pulled you in, make sure to subscribe and tap the moon bell so you never miss the next Alpha Destiny. And tell me in the comments, who should we follow next under the full moon?